Bien le bonjour, and thanks for joining me in this video about the third boss from the Sigmascape part of the Omega raid, the Guardian. This impressive opponent represented the pinnacle of the Magitech war machines in Final Fantasy VI, and it showcased that a few times throughout the game. Only one encounter was mandatory in the main story, thus this arena was remade for the Sigmascape. To be precise, the V3.0 is a mix of two locations from Kefka's Tower, FF6's last dungeon. The outside part comes from the outside part of the tower, whereas the ground we are walking on is from the inside but also the actual fighting screen where we fought the Guardian. Before covering the various abilities, I need to talk about the non-mandatory battles in the 6th. You could fight them thrice in the story, but it was really not recommended, as the script literally made them invincible. You could still flee, and if you kept being reckless despite the warnings, it used a basic attack. Once again, thanks to another script, that blow was so strong that it surely one-shotted the victim, which might have inspired the Arm & Hammer tank buster despite the trivial nature of the original command. The electrified borders of the Sigmascape's arena may be a vague reference to the third place you could fight it in FF6, where guardians were blocking each entrances and exits of the Thamasa town. Well, now how about we finally cover its skills? Whether in the 14th or the 6th, the guardians switch between programs with many abilities associated to each of them, but also when none is loaded. However, both versions have their own subtleties, especially the fact that the one in the 14th summons, as an add, the boss which it currently uses the program of. In the 6th, it had only one set pattern of programs, in between which it used some of its own skills. Ultros, Dadaluma, Air Force and Ultima Weapon, that last one being pushed back as the last boss of the Fractal Continuum hard mode dungeon. However, the abilities used in each phase were mostly randomized, but I'll still proceed in that order to compare with the 14th. As the Bibliotaph and its associated skills in FF14 never existed in FF6, I won't talk about them. In the 14th, the Guardian downloads its programs randomly from one ID to another, but the skills used in each phase stay in the exact same order. You know what, let's just get through the skill comparison. As an appetizer, the abilities without any program loaded. I already talked about the Arm & Hammer, so it's time for the Magitech Laser. It was a thunder-type magical skill only hitting one target. We can dodge that in the 14th, but there is no telegraph on the ground, so wake up! The missile hasn't fundamentally changed since the 6th episode, both inflict direct damages followed by a dot. But the actual damages differ greatly. The dot hits harder in the 14th and is quite short in its duration, whereas in FF6 it was an ailment called sap, which dealt rather few damages but stayed until it was cured. About the direct damage part, the one in FF14 has a set power, whereas in FF6 it reduced the target's HP by 1/4 of their current amount, which meant that damages could vary a lot. Atomic Rays in the 6th hit all your team with direct fire damages. The number 4 is reused for the 4 DPS in the 14th, but one thing has been added. Energy balls appear where the 4 victims stood and keep emitting an explosion. Now onto the main course with the Ultros program. The line he says when appearing as an ad comes from the beginning of the third encounter in FF6. Ultros' ink in the 6th only hit one character at a time, in addition to inflicting the blindness status unless they were immune. I have no idea though if it was intentional for the Guardian's program version or if it was a programming glitch, but this version never inflicted blindness on me. If it was intentional, that would explain why ink in the Sigmascape only deals direct damages, but not why it became some kind of AoE targeting every players. Let's just proceed to the next part, okay? The FF6 program's tentacle hit every character in your team, and to somewhat reference the max number of protagonists fighting at the same time in the 6th, there are 4 of them appearing in FF14, but you can at least avoid them. The last Ultros program ability was Stone, damaging one or all your characters. It could as well inflict the Confused ailment to them. It turned into the viral weapon in the Sigmascape Savage, inflicting the temporary misdirection ailment to your whole team, but is no longer tied to the Ultros program. Fortunately, when Confuse in FF6 made a character acting completely at random, the misdirection only restrains your ability to move around because of that little hand above your head. This latter locks itself when you try to move and forces you to run in that direction, then start spinning again once you stop. And if you don't believe me, just take a look at the Confuse spell in Final Fantasy VI. Any objection? That's what I thought. Let's see the second program now, Dadaluma. His lines when appearing are simply what he said before the encounter in the 6th. As he was a boss rather close to the beginning of Final Fantasy VI, he didn't have a lot of abilities. The team in charge of designing the Sigmascape encounters probably decided to use his likeliness to the playable character Sabin of the same episode to pilfer 2 of his blitz skills and to give them to Dadaluma in FF14. Aura Cannon only hit one randomly selected target despite the visual effect, which is especially referenced in the Savage mode since it will always aim at and hit at least one player. However, it can hit multiple players at once if they stand too close or in the same line as the target in addition to a dot. The normal mode Aura Cannon can be dodged by everyone. And Raging Fist, once again a one target hitting skill that Dadaluma uses regularly instead of his auto attacks. That's all for the stolen borrowed skills from Sabin. And now the only Dadaluma ability directly rehashed in both FF6 and 14's Guardians programs, Shockwave. Just dealing direct damage to one character, this skill has been turned into a pushback AoE in the 14th. The following segment is to be taken with a grain of salt as it is quite far-fetched. Dadaluma had the Protect spell to reduce the physical damages he received, and in the Guardians program it was changed into the Magitek Barrier, which, on top of the Protect effect, gave the Reflect buff that reflected spells. If there is an ability in the Sigmascape that can remind us of Magitek Barrier or Protect, it will be the Stone Skin used by the Ultros ad in Savage. This defensive buff gives a physical and magical damages absorbing shield equals to a percentage of the target's max HP. I warned you, it's a rather long reach, you can disagree with it, so let's head to the Air Force program. This boss shared many skills with the Guardian, I'm just gonna cover those used during the FF6 program. The AoE diffractive laser hitting your whole team has been remade in 2 forms in the 14th. One rather small circular AoE around the Guardian at the beginning of the program, and the much larger one used by the Air Force ad, which is visually closer to what it was in the 6th. Launcher in Final Fantasy VI launched 8 missiles randomly hitting your heroes, halving their current HP for each hit. In FF14, this ability isn't exclusive to the Air Force program anymore. Furthermore, those missiles appear on the same 3 sides of the arena but at random starting points and slowly hover forward. However, their potency in case someone hits them doesn't change. Finally, the last skill always used to conclude this program back in FF6 was called Wave Cannon. I'm a bit embarrassed since 2 AoEs in the Sigmascape share some likeliness, but none of them is exclusive to the Air Force face. As you can see, visually it looks a lot like diffractive plasma, but mechanic-wise, the countdown preceding the wave cannon seems to be transcribed with the 3 secondary cannon shots before the main cannon when the Guardian is flying around. I'll let you be the judge. Et voilà, that's all for the Guardian's comparison with his first appearance in FF6. However, if you're curious about Ultima Weapon renamed Ultima Beast, click on the video that must have already popped on the screen. Prenez soin de vous et amusez-vous bien.